Please join me to welcome John.
It's going to be fun.
Let's do it. All right, so we've been discussing M&As for about 2 hours.
Yes.
And I think you arrived at the right time because you have quite a bit of experience with that.
180.
And I actually put down some. I have a few numbers I put on the slides here as kind of a guide for discussion. So maybe we'll start with that. So 180. You became CEO of Cisco 95.
Yes.
Can you tell us about those numbers here?
Yes, when you think about it, that's probably 70 million in sales, which is what it was when I came to Cisco, and we went to.
Oh, that was 400 people. Sorry, that's a typo.
Yeah, okay. I was trying to get to it. When I came to Cisco, 70 million in sales and 400 people. Boy, I was struggling at 700. And I came there in January of 91 with the commitment to be the CEO in 2 years. It took 4. But we moved Cisco from a company that basically built routers and was a real techie company selling to really techie customers to a concept of using the internet to change the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays. Sounds very logical now, but back then nobody bought it. And when we started to do acquisitions, acquisitions filled this industry. And most of them did not understand a clear path to make it successful. And so when we did our first acquisition, just paid $92 million for a company with 10 million in revenue, our stock went down. We were very upfront. We went with a replicatable playbook on how we did acquisitions, and we cranked the suckers, and we hit probably 2 out of 3 of our acquisitions were successful. And I told the market that 1 out of 3 would fail, and I got beat up every time one failed. And I go, I told you it would fail, but it doesn't matter. So, and that's one of the things when you do acquisitions, you've got to realize that your critics will challenge you when they don't work. But we really did innovation through doing it ourselves, through acquiring, through strategic partner, and investing. And it was all 4 of those we ran the plays at the same time. We never had a competitor that got more than 25% market share in our 16 product targeted markets. So we used it very effectively. We had a lot of fun with it.
So actually going back to your first acquisition, one of the deals, the deal you mentioned, you championed, you were not CEO yet.
Right.
You kind of put a lot of your career prospects on that deal.
Yes, I bet my job on it.
What motivated you to actually do that? What made you think that was so important to do that it was worth betting on it? Because at that time there was a discussion between doing that deal, maybe merging Cisco with another company.
Yes, well, basically, just to give you a little bit of background, I came out of West Virginia and very proud of it. And we were the chemical center of the world, 6,000 amazing engineers in Charleston, West Virginia, FMC, DuPont Carbide, and we're the coal mining center of the U.S. with 125,000 miners. And yet, as the market changed, we did not, and my state got left behind. I then saw Boston, Route 128, and it was the Silicon Valley of the world. And when we looked out here at the crazy Californians, we thought they'll never get it right. And instead, 1,000 high-tech companies collapsed. And DEC with 120,000 people, Wang with 32,000 people, all the feeder systems disappeared because we did not reinvent ourselves. And I saw the transition from mainframes when I was with IBM to mini computers with Wang to PCs to the internet. And I saw if you don't disrupt, you get disrupted. So at Cisco, I always targeted my acquisitions. There was only one Steve Jobs, and he is as good as you heard, and I knew him reasonably well. And he just knew what to build, but even then it took him 7 years. So I got all my ideas on who to acquire, almost without exceptions, directly or indirectly from my customers. And so for the very first acquisition, I was in, and I'm telling you the story because this is how you need to think as a business development team. I had 8 business development leads, all were written up as the best in the industry. So clearly we had a replicatable process that really worked well. But for the first one, I was at Ford Motor Company, And Ford was talking to me about switching, and we were a router company. They said, John, you ought to think about this more. And I said, yeah, we're going into ATM switching because that's where 95% of all the smart people thought the connectivity would go. And they said, there's this new technology called Fast Ethernet we're looking at, and we might use it as an interim step to ATM. I had no idea what it was. And they explained it to me. 2 weeks later, I was at Boeing. And Boeing said, John, here's your order for your routers. We're looking at new technology rather than traditional ATM switching. I said, I know Fast Ethernet. And they said, yeah, how'd you know? And they're kind of surprised. And I told them what I knew about it. I said, what are you going to do with this? And they said, well, if you'll buy this company, we will give you a $10 million order. So I bought the company. But in the interim to that, I'd watched, if you're going to do something that other people have failed at, you're not going to be smarter, you're not going to work harder. So in a period of 3 weeks, we did an analysis of the market. Why did acquisitions fail? We came up with what ended up to be our golden rules of acquisitions, and then we played that every time we ran the play. So the first one was one called Crescendo, and I was shocked because when I brought it to the board of directors, I thought I'd have a lot of disagreement about doing acquisitions because they failed. And instead, they immediately got what I was doing, liked it so well, they wanted me to combine with a peer company called Synoptics and combine the two companies. And first of all, based on my studies, the best thing that can happen to your competitors is two of them combined when they're equal, and then divide titles and responsibilities. And that's happened to me several times in a very positive way. So I did not believe mergers among equals would work at all. And secondly, Synoptics culture, even though they were just a mile away from us, was more an East Coast culture and not risk takers, not aligned with ours at all. So I told the board I didn't think we should do it, and that it needed to be Crescendo. And you never read about this anywhere, but it was a real tough fight internally on it. And I finally just had to bet my job on it, and they hesitated, so I brought my senior management team in, and they bet their job, and they let us do this acquisition. But it ended up being the model for others. The acquisition was the first of 3 switching companies we bought, and it immediately, over a period of years, went to $13 billion a year for us and 60+% market share with 65% gross margins, which were unheard of in the industry for hardware. So that's how we did the first one. And if I hadn't been through the transitions, because I was with Dr. Ian Wang.
So you mean the failed transitions of IBM and
Wang and others
in
West Virginia.
Yep.
If I hadn't been at Wang, and Dr. Wang trusted me, I was the newest member to his team, and I'd been there 7 years. And he would not move to the PC because he had built one 4 or 5 years earlier and it didn't sell. But he didn't have applications with it. And I shared with him that I thought we were a software company, not a mini computer company, and that we needed to move our software to the PC for our future. And he was extremely good to me. Smartest man I've ever met in my life. He invented magnetic core memory walking across the Harvard Yard. I am really good at math, as you probably already figured out. I'm terrible in English. But he could do the math quicker in his head than I could with a calculator or a business case I knew cold. And he let me run Asia Pacific, the only non-Chinese person ever to run China for him, etc. And when I told him we had to move and I thought we were making a mistake, it's the only time ever he was mad at me. He was. And his hand was shaking and I backed off. He had 32 patents. He understood this industry. He had steered the company through 30 years of tremendous growth and transitions. And in hindsight, I should have gone to the wall on that one. So when the challenge came at Cisco, I was willing to go to the wall. And I told my wife ahead of time that if I did this, there's a 50-50 chance we won't be employed after this. And they offered me the CEO position of the combined companies, and I said, I'm not going to do it. I think it will fail. So what you have to do if you're thinking of mergers and acquisitions is, most important, understand what you're buying and protect it at all costs. And it is different by industry and by organization what you're buying. And I'll use prior acquisitions of a number of years ago so I don't step on anybody's toes in the room. When Nations bought Bank of America, what were they buying? Hugh McCall was buying customers and geographies He was not interested in the people, and you saw most of the Bank of America team leave. I would argue in technology, when you buy a company, that's your Oracle, and Oracle has mastered the hostile takeover to beat their competitors in terms of an approach. And I actually, Safra Katz, who's the president of Oracle, she invites me to teach one class a year with her. She teaches at Stanford, and I teach the M&A piece of it. So we're very close. But they do both regular takeovers, hostile takeovers, and they will often absorb a competitor as much to slow down people as other things. But you understand what you're acquiring. And what I was doing was acquiring next generation products, because the premium that I paid for the acquisition, often as much as $1 million per person, was not logical in today's market on their run rate. I was analyzing what would be the run rate that I would want to be at, blowing it through Cisco's channels. So that's how I did my math on what was an acquisition worth to me, and would it be a very good return for the shareholders. And I'll always believe in creating a win-win. I never do a win-lose in anything I do in life. If it's not a win for my partner, I won't do it, no matter how attractive it is for me. And so we outlined that when you're in high tech, you're acquiring people and next generation products. So if you don't hold the founder, if you don't hold the emotional leaders, if you don't hold the top engineers, you've made a terrible business decision. And to give you the math on it, in Silicon Valley, when acquisitions are done, especially once the golden handcuffs come off, the attrition rate runs between 20 to 30% for the next 4 years. And so what happens, you don't get the second generation product out. My attrition rate ran 4%. My own company attrition rate ran 5%, which is really low for the Valley as well. Normally the Valley runs 12% or so in terms of voluntary attrition. So understand what you're acquiring, protect it at all costs. Now here comes the curve. Very often when energy companies combined or banks combined, etc., they were combining products, geography, etc. And so it wasn't near as people sensitive as the technology industry. But as every company you acquire over this next decade will probably be indirectly or directly a technology company, if you don't hold the technology leaders in that, you're going to have trouble. So almost every startup I'm involved in, it doesn't matter if it's in automotive, it doesn't matter if it's in security, it doesn't matter if it's in insurance, it doesn't matter if it's in banking or government, is having a huge technology piece to it. So you have to think differently about the M&As as we go forward than before.
That was a very solid introduction to that. A couple of questions about
I'm
that.
still looking over the numbers. I get the 1/3, 2/3. I know where you're going on that. A third, a third I have to think about.
So about the, I think what surprised a lot of people is the success rate of your M&As. And I was wondering how that evolved over time, because now you have very sophisticated playbook, you have big teams, you have all those rules you came up with that like ensure like better success.
Yeah.
But when you started, probably that success rate was lower. So what helped you learn, and what are the things that can help? Like, is this playbook transferable to other companies?
Yeah.
And how did you learn to build it? Like, what were the key moments?
So because we were so early versus all of our peers in doing these successfully, and like most things you do in the Valley, the word spreads quickly about who's good at M&A and do you keep the talent with you afterwards on it. And the VCs, we developed a very tight relationship, and they never gave me a bad company, because if they did, I wouldn't buy another one from them. And there's a lot of trust. But we developed this playbook on the first one, and we just tweaked it up and down. What we did get was very good at our ecosystem of support and our ability to bring HR in, and the rhythm that we'd give people to speak. So as an example, the playbook didn't change dramatically. The first and golden rule is acquisitions are really hard. So for your acquisition target, you've got to be able to articulate where they fit into your strategy, and you've got to have a similar view of how the strategies play out together. If they see it as a different strategy and you're going one way and they're going another, then when you try to put them together, high probability of failing.
So
Second,
alignment of vision.
Alignment of vision for the industry and the role that each person plays in it. The second is, this may surprise you, I would never, people said, how did you get the company to adjust to your culture? The answer is I didn't. I didn't acquire a company that had a different culture. And I walked from a dozen of deals as I got into it, when I found that the company I was going to acquire was not customer focused, or it didn't share the success of the company with their employees, or had a culture that is one that would not fit into Cisco. The third element is you had to make sure that you could hold the people, of which culture is part of that. And so I would literally make sure and meet with myself the top leaders in each category to make sure that I could hold them. And I'd get their personal handshake, much more important than the contract. I'm a reformed lawyer, I never practice, but you can break any contract you want if your ethics aren't there. I just wanted the person's handshake. And by the way, I did all my acquisitions on a handshake. It drove my lawyers crazy. I basically do it on a handshake, and I didn't do business with people I couldn't trust, and I never had one of them fail on it. And so we would look at the other golden rules about holding the people. I started with geographic proximity for several reasons. The further I got away, the harder it was to back channel the founders, harder to back channel with customers, harder that if the acquisition wasn't as successful as I want, could I move the resources somewhere else within Cisco? Because if they see when an acquisition fails, you then turn around and fire the 100 people, that word gets out in the other startups and they won't come to you. And so if you've got to isolate a place where your acquisition is Akron, Ohio, and it doesn't work, or you're not able to give them career promotion, and your executives don't even go there once a year, it gets into trouble. So I used geographic ties being a very important part. If it wasn't in Silicon Valley, it needed to be in Boston or in Texas or in RTP in terms of the approach. So again, golden rules on how do we do it, stuck very closely with it. However, to the point that you just made, Ivan, is that we then fine-tuned it very well to where it was an art. And an art could be, I would get a call on a Thursday night from the NASDAQ, from the head of the NASDAQ, and he said, John, I'm not giving you any inside information on this, but it's well known that two of your competitors are about to acquire the company in Silicon Valley. You ought to be acquiring. And it's going to go down fast, and it's going to be way over $3 billion. And he said I was an idiot. He was right. And so I said, all right, Al, what's the name of the company? And he told me the name of the company. I had no idea who they were. But I trusted, again, the customer, and they knew my strategy and direction. And so I said, give me the name of the CEO. And I called the CEO, and I said, can I have a business development guy meet with you tomorrow morning at 8:30? And the CEO said yes. So I had my business development guy go over at 8:30 in the morning. He called me at 9:30. He said, John, get over here. And I met with the CEO, and at noon we had a handshake for a $3 billion acquisition. And we had it through both boards, announced, meeting with the employees before the market opened on Monday morning. And my peers never even knew we were in the count. And so we moved with tremendous speed. But one of the lessons here that I'm sharing with you is that I used to view process as bureaucracy. And I've learned that process done right allows you to move with speed that others cannot match. And when we'd go in, after we did the first couple acquisitions, I would take the last acquisition we did, ask the CEO to come into the new acquisition and speak to the room about what's it like to be acquired. And then we knew the questions that people would go through. So when we did the individual ideal lockups for 2 years for the companies we were working with, we knew what the issues would be, we knew how to handle the objections. We were also upfront. If we can get the people to sign up, even though the plane's circling and we're about to announce this on Monday morning, and we'd usually get the sign-ups during the weekend, if we couldn't get the majority of people we wanted signed staying with us, we'd walk. And it wasn't arrogance on that. We were just practical that if people wouldn't sign the alignment, we probably wouldn't be able to get the deal. Our HR teams would come in and say, here's the questions, here's how insurance is going to work, here's what the organization is. We had what we called the Mario rule. That was from our first acquisition, Mario Mazzola, Prim James, Luca Cafaro. They had a view that, John, they were worried that I would fire people on their group once I got control of the company that they didn't want to let go. So the rule was I wouldn't let anybody go from the company or any of my team unless they signed off on it. And so that allowed a consistency of predictability. And Rule 101, if you're going to cut people in the new organization as part of your acquisition because you don't need the extra finance people or part of it doesn't come in your plan, you save the time of the acquisition. You don't want people thinking there's a second shoe to drop. at any point in time. It's amazing how many companies not only drop a second, a third, or fourth shoe as you go through it. And then, what is a leader's currency? Track record, trust, and relationships. And so we developed those three so tightly that we can really drive it through with tremendous speed in these companies and the direction overall. And then we would basically point to the examples for people that had hesitance about here's what you can learn from other groups. By the way, that first acquisition ended up not only producing $13 billion in revenue per year for me, they also did 6 separate $1 billion a year products for me in separate areas beyond switching. And so talent, keep the talent, and I had acquisition talent all the way through my organization. So when an acquisition would say to me, John, do we really have a career future here? I'd be able to point to it. And many of the acquisitions you do are serial entrepreneurs, and they will break 2 years afterwards if you don't get them committed in the first year during that period about saying you wanted to keep them after that and then finding the right job for them to go into. I held probably in excess of 70 to 80% of the acquired CEOs in the company of Cisco for many years, at least 5, after they became part of us.
So basically the company now has like over 100 CEOs running different businesses within the company.
It did probably, at the time I left, had a very large number of those. Now remember, my first acquisition is 1993, so a lot of people retire, a lot of people have different elements. So over the 5 years following that, yes, the majority of the CEOs were still in the roles.
That actually leads me to...
In security, probably the hottest area going. As I left, I made security the #1 priority for Cisco. We did a lot of acquisitions. At one time, I think we'd done 10 acquisitions and we've not lost a CEO during the 4 years that we were doing them. Now that's a huge advantage for you when you go out and recruit other security companies. It also scares the startups to death because I'm getting a portfolio that they can't compete against. And if I tie them together architecturally, then it's game over for them.
Actually, that's something...
And I love to compete. I apologize on that, as you can probably already figure out.
That's something that surprised me. When we ran another event in June, we had a number of a panel of corp dev on M&As. So one guy from Cisco was from a company that actually got acquired, and he was actually running the CEO forum within Cisco. So you have an organization